Hi there ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. Today we're once again looking at a time when people took off their clothes and lived as nature intended. Yes, we're looking at the film that kicked off the whole British nudist film genre, 1959's Nudist Paradise. So, 1959 and Nudist Paradise, the film that set the ball rolling for what was to become the British sexploitation film industry. And a film that proudly proclaimed itself the first British nudist feature. The nudist genre was one that selective UK audiences had already experienced. A couple of American-made nudist films had already been shown over here, but Nudist Paradise was the first time Her Majesty's very own subjects had got them off on the big screen. More than 50 years later, it is a little difficult to think of this as a controversial envelope-pushing production, but in a period when nudity was rarely experienced outside of the pocket-sized glamour magazines of Harrison Marx and Anna Louis Miller, the prospect of seeing nudity on the big screen in full colour, and in full Eastman colour no less, must have had cinema goers straining at the leash. If you don't believe me, check out these photos of the British public forming an orderly queue to see two of the films that sprung up in the wake of Nudist Paradise. These days, people are more likely to know of Nudist Paradise from its appearance in the opening scene of Carry On Camping, where Sid James and Bernard Bresslaw dragged their reluctant girlfriends along to a flea-pitch screening of the film. I do have mixed feelings about the depiction of Nudist Paradise in Carry On Camping. On one hand, the film does live up to the laughability promised by the Carry On film. Everything you imagine to be in a nudist film is all present and correct here. The nude volleyball contests, the constant blocking of actors' genitals by towels, inanimate objects and other cast members' heads, and a cheery but disingenuous voiceover singing the praises of the nudist lifestyle. On the other hand, I have to admit that Carry On Camping does do a bit of a hatchet job on Nudist Paradise, and they make it look a lot more shoddy and low budget than it actually is. As you might expect from an envelope-pushing production that knows it's going to fall under the close scrutiny of the censor, Nudist Paradise does put on a more respectable and legitimate front than the many films that followed in its wake. Nudist Paradise was directed by Charles Saunders, an underrated B-level director who made many entertaining crime films like Naked Fury, Danger by My Side and Jungle Street Girls, as well as an entertainingly daft British horror film called Woman Eater, in which a mad doctor feeds women to a cannibalistic tree monster, a film which, needless to say, I highly recommend. Ironically, given how synonymous nudist films were to become with cheap and shoddy filmmaking, Saunders looks to have had a larger budget on hand here than any of his crime and horror films of the period, as well as the added luxuries of shooting in colour and in Technoscope, or Nudiscope as it was advertised. Right from the get-go, Nudist Paradise is quick to emphasise its legitimacy in its opening credits. The film was made with the blessing of the British Sunbathing Association, and has a curious connection to British nobility. Nudist Paradise was made with the cooperation of Ian Russell, the 13th Duke of Bedford, who briefly appears in the film's opening scene, fully clothed it should be said. In what appears to have been a "you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours" agreement, the filmmakers and the nudists were allowed access to the Duke's country estate, Woburn Abbey, the filmmakers to make this film, and the nudist community to hold a 6th World Naturist Congress on his grounds. In return, the opening scene of Nudist Paradise is a none too subtle advertisement for Woburn Abbey, which conveniently had just opened to the British public for the first time. Apparently, opening Woburn Abbey up to the public had alienated the Duke from many of the knobs and the tops of the period, and I doubt lending his name and property to Nudist Paradise and the 6th World Naturist Congress helped matters very much either. After documenting Woburn Abbey and the 6th World Naturist Congress, from which most of the footage used in Carry On Camping comes from, Nudist Paradise then drops its documentary pretense in favour of the fictional story of Joan Stanton and Mike Malone. Now, one of the most amusing aspects to Nudist Paradise is that Mike is a bit of a nutjob, although the film never recognises this fact. Mike is a tad obsessed with Joan. He follows her to a place of work, discovers where she lives and then starts hanging around outside her house. He then asks Joan's best friend Pat out for a dance in order to try and meet Joan through her. He also buys a bicycle in order to follow Joan around everywhere, and documents all of this in a diary. When the film was released in America as Nature's Paradise, it enjoyed a couple of driving play dates, along with another British exploitation film called Covergirl Killer. While I'm sure this double bill was purely the result of someone slapping together two British films, it does seem a rather apt pairing, given that both these films deal with ultra-obsessed men who are going to great lengths to pursue women. Although, unlike Covergirl Killer, Nudist Paradise is never remotely critical of its main character's behaviour. On the contrary, Nudist Paradise argues that a woman should appreciate a man going to all these lengths to court her. As Pat remarks, "I'd be flattered if it was me he was after." During his pursuit of Joan, Mike inevitably discovers a secret Joan has been hiding from all her work friends. Yes, Joan is a nudist and a fully paid up member of Spielplatz nudist camp. Mike, being quite the stalker, also decides to join up for the weekend too. Now, it is here that Nudist Paradise does break from the conventions of nudist cinema, in that Mike isn't motivated into joining the camp out of some love of the nudist lifestyle. Rather, he just signs up for it as a way of trying to fuck Joan. There is, however, a more wholesome subplot in which Joan talks Pat into joining the camp, offering reassurance that in general people don't join nudist camps out of some underlying sexual motive like Mike's. Joan not only takes the nudist lifestyle, but also finds love in the form of Joan's nudist pal Jimmy, who previously seemed to have a thing for Joan himself. This of course leaves the door open for Mike to have a shot at Joan. Although when Joan and Pat discover Mike has joined the camp and first see him in the nude, they both burst out laughing, presumably not the response Mike had hoped for. Although after she has seen him in the nude, Joan does warm to Mike considerably, so maybe there was a side to Mike's appeal that the restrictions of 1950 cinema prevented us from seeing. Since Nudist Paradise has to wear the mask of nudist propaganda, there isn't much room for dramatic incident, and very little of interest really happens here. Jimmy's badminton skills improve, Pat wins a nudist beauty contest, and predictably Joan and Mike end up getting married. That is basically it, aside from the two couples playing volleyball, badminton, and proclaiming how healthy their lifestyles are, while smoking cigarette after cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. Were it not for the nudist aspect, this may well have been one of the most boring films ever made. Although of course this film would never have been made were it not for the nudist aspect. So everyone lives happily ever after, and the characters in Nudist Paradise are such a cheery bunch that they even break the fourth wall in order to wave goodbye to the audience at the end of the film. The overall message to the film seems to be that if you harass a woman at her place of work, follow her home and intrude on her private life, then of course she'll eventually fall for your charms, and within a year you'll be married and she'll be bearing you offspring. It's less Nudist Paradise and more Stalker's Paradise. If you explore the British nudist film in some depth, the genre does seem to have been an unlikely outlet for a lot of male hang-ups and anxieties about the expanding role of women in society. Joan and Pat, like the heroines of My Fair Lady and Four Members Only, begin as relatively independent, career-minded characters, but for whom the nudist camp experience causes them to reconnect with their subservient maternal side, and inevitably they end up falling for men and becoming these little housewives and mothers in the making. These films do hold up a mirror to their times, even if we might not like what we see in that mirror these days. If nothing else, this aspect to these films does add interesting shadings to a genre that often seems to be lacking any real substance, as well as a malicious bite, sure to take off guard those seeking out these films and expecting nothing more than harmless kicks that they can have a cheap laugh at. In fairness, not all British nudist films follow this chauvinistic line. One film that breaks the mould in this respect, but never gets any credit for it, is Harrison Marx's Naked as Nature Intended, in which a group of women escape the drudgery of their dull jobs and miserable male bosses for a nudist weekend in Cornwall, where they are never diverted from the fun and freedom by romance or the need to be somebody's wife or girlfriend. Not only is Naked as Nature Intended a very rare example of a British road movie, It's an even rarer example of a female British road movie. Naked as Nature Intended is an even more subversive piece of cinema if, like the British censor John Trevelyan, you find yourself questioning whether the female characters in this film are all meant to be lesbians. I can't quite see why Trevelyan came to that conclusion. I mean, just because two female characters in a film go on holiday together, show no interest in men, are completely comfortable with appearing naked in front of each other, and work as petrol pump attendants? Well, maybe Naked as Nature Intended will one day be rediscovered as a queer feminist road movie after all. As for the comparatively straight-laced Nudist Paradise, I will concede that the film is a bit of a museum piece these days. But as film director Michael Winner pointed out several years ago, these nudist films broke down barriers and ultimately paved the way for the screen freedoms that would later be enjoyed by more serious filmmakers, people like John Schlesinger, Ken Russell and Stanley Kubrick. So for that reason, I do think cinema lovers do owe these films a debt, and the likes of Nudist Paradise thoroughly deserve their footnote in the history of British cinema, one that shouldn't be concealed by a strategically placed towel. Anyway, that's all for now, so all it remains to say is good night and God bless.